Kids, Larry Clark's explosive directorial debut, crashed into American consciousness in 1995 like a brick through glass. Written by 19-year-old Harmony Korine and starring a cast of mostly non-professional teenage actors, the film positioned itself as an unvarnished window into the lives of New York City youth, their language, their sexuality, their nihilism, their violence. Set over a single summer day in Manhattan, the film follows a group of teenagers engaging in casual sex, drug use, and aimless conversation centered around Telly, a self-proclaimed virgin surgeon who specifically targets young girls. Behind its veneer of documentary-style realism lay complex questions about where observation ends and exploitation begins. Questions that would come to a head during the filming of a scene so controversial that participants were contractually obligated never to discuss its full circumstances. From its inception, Kids operated on the margins of traditional filmmaking, with a budget of approximately $1.5 million, paltry by Hollywood standards. Clark and his skeleton crew were constantly scraping by, filming guerrilla style across New York City, often without permits, always racing against time and money. The weather didn't help either. The summer of '94 was punishingly hot in New York, with temperatures regularly climbing above 90 degrees. Many of the apartment scenes were filmed in actual Manhattan apartments without air conditioning, where the combined heat of bodies, lights, and equipment created sweltering conditions that tested everyone's endurance. But perhaps the most intense pressure came from Clark's unorthodox directing style. According to production assistant Jennifer Venditti, who would later become a celebrated casting director, Clark would often let scenes play out beyond the scripted action, encouraging the young cast to improvise and blur the lines between performance and reality. This approach yielded the film's distinctive authenticity, but also created an environment where boundaries could become dangerously unclear. When one particularly sensitive scene wasn't working as written, cinematographer Eric Edwards suggested shooting it in near darkness, using only practical lights from inside the apartment and street lights filtering through the windows. This last-minute change not only saved the day technically, but inadvertently provided visual cover for performances that might have otherwise been too explicit to include in the final cut. The scene in question takes place late in the film's runtime. The apartment had been cleared of all non-essential crew. Clark had reportedly instituted what multiple sources described as an unprecedented level of privacy, with only the director, cinematographer, sound recordist, and the young performers present. Everyone else waited on the street below, murmuring about what might be happening upstairs. What was filmed that afternoon appears in the finished movie in heavily edited form. A scene involving unconsciousness, violation, and the complete abdication of moral responsibility. But according to producer Carrie Woods in a rare 2015 interview with Variety, what was captured on film went significantly beyond even the boundary-pushing final cut. There were takes that none of us could legally include, that no one outside that room has ever seen. One actress, who has requested anonymity in subsequent interviews, reportedly broke down after filming wrapped that day. According to 3 separate crew members who were present when she emerged from the apartment, she was visibly shaken and immediately left the set, not returning for 2 days. A production assistant who worked on the film told The Guardian in 2020, "There was a point where you couldn't tell if they were acting or if something genuinely disturbing was happening. The line got very blurry." The young cast of Kids carried a burden that extended far beyond typical on-set challenges. Most had never acted before. Many were actually living versions of the street life they portrayed, and all were being asked to perform material that would have challenged even seasoned professionals. For the actresses in particular, the toll was both physical and psychological. The performer at the center of the controversial scene later described in a 2015 New Yorker profile feeling completely exposed and vulnerable. She added, "I didn't understand what was acting and what wasn't. I didn't know I could say no to certain things." The combination of inexperience, youth, and the improvisational nature of Clark's direction created a perfect storm of potential harm. Rosario Dawson, who was discovered sitting on her front porch and cast in the film at age 15, has spoken about the disorienting experience of suddenly being thrust into such adult content. "One day, I'm a normal teenager. The next, I'm in scenes discussing things I barely understood myself. she told Rolling Stone in a 2000 interview. During the filming of the forbidden scene, temperatures in the apartment reportedly reached over 100 degrees. The lights, the closeness of bodies, the emotional intensity created an atmosphere that one crew member described as hallucinatory. Some of the young actors were visibly sweating, exhausted, their defenses lowered by the grueling conditions and the pressure to deliver authentic performances. Larry Clark came to Kids after decades as a photographer, known for his unflinching documentation of teenage life on the margins. Born in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1943, Clark developed an early fascination with capturing raw, unfiltered youth experience. His photography books, Tulsa, 1971, and Teenage Lust, 1983, established his reputation for work that refused to look away from adolescent sexuality, drug use, and violence. Clark's own adolescence had been marked by drug addiction and instability, experiences that informed his artistic perspective, but also complicated his relationship to his subjects. He developed a deeply held belief that mainstream culture sanitized and misrepresented teenage experience, and he positioned his work as a corrective to those false narratives. But herein lay the central contradiction that would come to define the Kids controversy. The same uncompromising authenticity that made Clark's vision artistically significant also raised profound questions about power, consent, and exploitation when applied to directing actual teenagers in sexually explicit scenarios. The man who claimed to be revealing the unvarnished truth about youth was himself nearly 50 years old, directing performers as young as 15 through scenes that would permanently alter their lives. If Clark represented one end of the creative spectrum behind Kids, then Chloë Sevigny embodied something altogether different. Discovered by Harmony Korine while sitting on a bench in New York's Washington Square Park, Sevigny was cast as Jenny, one of the film's central characters, at age 19. Unlike many cast members who were essentially playing versions of themselves, Sevigny came from a comfortable Connecticut suburb, the daughter of an accountant father and Polish-American mother. Her entree into New York's downtown scene had been recent, her navigation of the city's youth culture still fresh and evolving. Sevigny has described the discord between her real personality and her role. "I was actually quite conservative," she told The Guardian in 2003. "I wasn't sexually active. I didn't do drugs. I was nothing like my character." This distance between performer and role would prove both a shield and a burden during the film's most difficult scenes. The tension between Clark's insistence on authenticity and Sevigny's performance of a reality she hadn't personally experienced illuminates the central question behind the forbidden scene. Was this documentation or fabrication? Was it revealing truth or manufacturing it? And if performers were being directed to enact experiences beyond their own, at what point does verisimilitude become something more troubling? The mythology around Kids has calcified over decades, but several commonly accepted narratives deserve correction. The entire film was improvised by real street kids simply living their lives on camera. While many scenes featured improvisation and most cast members were non-professional actors, Kids had a script written by Harmony Korine. According to producer Kerry Woods in his memoir Cloudbusting, many scenes were carefully planned and rehearsed, including elements of the controversial scene. The sexual content in the film reflected the actual behaviors of the teenage cast. Multiple cast members have since clarified that their on-screen actions were performances that diverged significantly from their personal lives. Leo Fitzpatrick, who played Telly, told Vice in 2015, "I was nothing like my character. I was terrified of girls at that age." There was no oversight or protection for the young performers during filming. While standards were certainly different in 1995, and many have criticized the production's approach to working with young performers, the film did have what was then considered appropriate supervision. According to production coordinator Mary Jordan, parents of performers under 18 were generally present on set, though they were removed during filming of certain scenes, including the controversial one. The forbidden scene was completely unplanned and captured spontaneously. Court documents from a later lawsuit revealed that while some elements were improvised, the basic structure of the scene was scripted. What reportedly crossed lines were specific directions given during filming that pushed beyond what had been agreed to in advance. All participants understood what they were signing up for. Several cast members have since spoken about not fully comprehending the implications of their involvement. One actress told the New York Times in a 2000 retrospective, "I was 16. I didn't understand how this would follow me for the rest of my life." When Kids premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January 1995, the response was seismic. It was acquired by Miramax, which had to create an entirely new company, Shining Excalibur Films, to release it after Disney, Miramax's parent company, refused to distribute an NC-17 rated film. Critics were polarized. The Chicago Sun-Times' Roger Ebert called it the kind of movie that needs to be talked about afterward, while others condemned it as borderline child pornography. The Washington Post's Rita Kempley famously wrote, "If Clark were 16, this would be child pornography, but since he's 52, it's art." The film's impact extended far beyond critical discourse. Its raw aesthetic influenced fashion. Calvin Klein's controversial 1995 campaign drew direct inspiration, music videos, the gritty youth documentation pioneered by Spike Jonze and others, and sparked a new wave of independent cinema focused on teenage life. Kids grossed over $7 million at the box office, a substantial return on its small investment, but its cultural footprint far exceeded its commercial impact. It launched the careers of Chloë Sevigny, Rosario Dawson, and Harmony Korine, while establishing Clark as a controversial but undeniably influential directorial voice. The forbidden scene itself became something of an urban legend in film circles, discussed in hushed tones at film schools and industry events. The fact that participants couldn't speak about it only enhanced its mystique, turning it into a symbol of the era's complicated relationship with boundaries and exploitation in the name of art. In the years following the release of Kids, a code of silence surrounded the circumstances of the forbidden scene. Multiple sources have confirmed that non-disclosure agreements were signed by everyone present during filming. These legal documents explicitly prohibited discussion of specific events that transpired on set that day. Silence wasn't merely contractual. According to a production assistant who spoke anonymously to Filmmaker magazine in 2010, there was an understanding that talking about what happened wouldn't help anyone. Not the actors who were trying to move on with their careers, not Larry, who genuinely believed in what he was doing, not the producers who could face legal consequences. Some of the young performers disappeared from public life entirely. Others fought to establish identities separate from the film. In a rare moment of near disclosure, one actress told the Los Angeles Times in 2005, "There are things that happened that I'm still processing 10 years later. I can't talk about specifics, but I can say that boundaries were crossed." Clark himself has been characteristically unapologetic. In a 2020 interview with Dazed, he maintained that everything we did was necessary for the truth of the film, though he acknowledged that certain things wouldn't be done the same way today. Perhaps most telling is what happened behind the scenes in Hollywood after Kids. Industry standards for working with young performers were quietly but significantly strengthened. Intimacy coordinators, now standard on productions involving sexual content, trace part of their origin story to the whispered cautionary tales of productions like Kids. What we witnessed in Kids was the last gasp of an older, more reckless approach to capturing youth on film, a method that prioritized authenticity above all else, including the well-being of its young subjects. The forbidden scene stands as both warning and watershed, a moment when cinema's pursuit of truth collided with its ethical responsibilities in ways that would reshape how we approach representation. It looked like raw documentation of teenage reality. It cost some young performers their sense of security and agency. It became both an influential artistic statement and a cautionary tale about the line between observation and exploitation. There is something both magnificent and terrible in Clark's vision. The unflinching eye that refuses to look away from youth's darkest corners. But that same unflinching quality, when applied to directing actual teenagers through explicit material, reveals the contradiction at the heart of his project. Can we truly document without distorting? Can we observe without influencing? Can we expose without exploiting? If this kind of truth-telling about film history matters to you, if you believe in both celebrating groundbreaking cinema and holding it accountable, consider subscribing. We'll continue pulling back the curtain on the complex, often contradictory moments that shape the movies we think we know. Because understanding the full context of how art is made doesn't diminish its power. It deepens our relationship to it, complications and all. What makes this particular scene so significant wasn't just its content, though that was certainly provocative enough. It was what? It represented the precise moment when the pursuit of authenticity in American independent cinema collided with questions of ethics, consent, and the protection of vulnerable performers. In an era before intimacy coordinators, before widespread recognition of power dynamics on set, before the industry had fully reckoned with its responsibilities toward young performers, this scene became a flashpoint. One that participants would be contractually forbidden from discussing, but that would nonetheless change how boundary-pushing content would be approached for decades to come. But here's where it gets complicated. The very qualities that made Kids a landmark film, its unvarnished look at teenage behavior, its refusal to moralize or sanitize, were inseparable from the methods that created it. The film's power came from its rawness, and that rawness came at a price that some of its young cast members are still calculating. The daily shooting schedule was punishing, especially for inexperienced performers. With money running out and locations frequently secured without proper permits, scenes often had to be captured in just a few takes before the production needed to move on, or sometimes literally run from authorities. Costume designer Kim Drew Sava recalled to Film Comment in 2005 how the production existed in a constant state of organized chaos. There were almost no trailers, no real infrastructure you'd expect even on a low-budget film. Kids would be sitting on the curb waiting to shoot. There was a kind of anarchic energy that matched the film's subject matter. The weather, the financial constraints, the guerrilla shooting style, all created an atmosphere where boundaries between performance and reality became increasingly porous. When traditional filmmaking guardrails are removed, decisions get made on the fly, and that's when things can veer into dangerous territory. And this moment has become the stuff of indie film legend. When one particularly difficult scene wasn't working, production designer Ginger Tugas salvaged the day by suggesting they use the natural graffiti and destruction of an abandoned building they'd found, transforming a potential disaster into one of the film's most visually striking sequences. Sometimes chaos breeds innovation. What we know about this scene comes primarily from what made it to screen, careful statements made years later by participants, and court documents from subsequent legal actions. The room was dark. The camera moved with an unsettling intimacy. Multiple young performers were involved in actions that blurred the line between simulation and reality. The scene took place late in the day. The skeleton crew had dwindled further. No parents were present, despite some performers being minors. A skeleton crew remained. Clark, cinematographer Eric Edwards, a sound technician, and the young performers. Everyone else was sent away, told to wait on the street below. According to sound recordist Craig Handley in a 2015 Filmmaker magazine interview, there was a moment when Larry pushed for something that wasn't planned, that wasn't in the script. I can't say more than that, but there was visible discomfort from at least two of the kids. Now, if you're wondering why no one intervened, it's important to understand the context of independent filmmaking in the mid-1990s. The boundaries between director and performer were less clearly defined. The mechanisms for reporting concerns were virtually non-existent, and the culture celebrated directors who pushed limits, who extracted raw, authentic performances by any means necessary. What emerged from that day of filming was more than just controversial footage. It was a reckoning with questions that the industry is still answering. Who protects young performers? Where is the line between direction and coercion? What obligations do filmmakers have to those who bring their visions to life? The physical environment itself exacted a price. The stifling summer heat, the cramped New York apartments serving as sets, the harsh lights, the endless takes. One crew member recounted witnessing a young actress nearly faint after a particularly intense scene, her body simply giving out after hours in the sweltering conditions. Makeup brushes, half-empty water bottles, discarded script pages, cigarette butts and emptied beer cans, and the relentless whir of an overworked fan that did little to cut through the thickness of the air. These were the tactile realities of the production, the mundane objects surrounding a moment that was anything but ordinary. But the psychological toll cut deeper. Justin Pierce, who played Casper in the film and who would tragically take his own life 5 years after the film's release, spoke briefly about the production in a 1997 interview with The Face. There were days when it didn't feel like acting, when it felt like something else entirely, something darker. What they don't teach you in film school is that a director's pursuit of authenticity can become a kind of violence of its own, a demand for emotional exposure that leaves real wounds long after the cameras stop rolling. The line between capturing reality and creating trauma is vanishingly thin, especially when working with young, inexperienced performers. The controversial scene was entirely improvised in the moment. According to court documents filed in 1998, while some elements were improvised, the basic structure had been outlined in advance. What reportedly crossed ethical lines were specific directions given during filming that hadn't been agreed to beforehand. As cinematographer Eric Edwards later told Film Comment, "There was a script, but Larry created an environment where deviation was not just possible, but encouraged." The film was celebrated universally as a groundbreaking masterpiece. Critical response was deeply divided. While Janet Maslin of the New York Times praised its powerful reportorial authority, others like the Washington Post's Desson Howe condemned it as virtually child pornography. The film currently holds a 46% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, reflecting this polarization. All the performers were actual street kids with no acting experience. While many were non-professionals, several, including Chloë Sevigny, had modeling experience and some training. Others, like Justin Pierce, had connections to New York's skateboarding scene, but came from middle-class backgrounds quite different from their characters. Kids landed like a grenade in American culture. Conservative commentators decried it as evidence of moral decay. Public health advocates praised its unflinching portrayal of HIV risk. Parents groups called for boycotts. Film students declared it required viewing, and that's when everything changed. The independent film landscape underwent a seismic shift. Suddenly, major studios were creating indie divisions, looking to capitalize on the commercial potential of boundary-pushing content. Miramax became a dominant force. Harvey Weinstein, whose company distributed the film, gained unprecedented power that he would later abuse in ways that would spark another reckoning decades later. For the young cast, the aftermath was complicated. Some, like Sevigny and Dawson, built successful careers. Others struggled with the film's shadow. Harold Hunter, who played a supporting role, battled substance abuse issues before his death in 2006. Justin Pierce died by suicide in 2000. Clarke went on to direct more films exploring youth culture and sexuality, including Bully, 2001, and Ken Park, 2002, the latter of which faced even more extreme censorship challenges. Careen established himself as one of American cinema's most idiosyncratic voices with films like Gummo, 1997, and later Spring Breakers, 2012. But perhaps the film's most significant legacy was invisible, the quiet strengthening of protections for young performers in the years that followed. Industry practices slowly evolved. The forbidden scene became a cautionary tale whispered between producers and directors, a line that shouldn't be crossed again. Some cast members have never spoken publicly about their experiences on set. Others have carefully navigated around the specifics of the forbidden scene while acknowledging the broader challenges of the production. Sevigny, in particular, has walked a delicate line in interviews, acknowledging both the film's importance to her career and its problematic aspects. "There are things that happen that I wouldn't allow to happen today," she told The Guardian in 2016, "but I was young, and I didn't know I could say no." This statement, carefully worded to avoid violating her NDA, nevertheless speaks volumes about the power dynamics at play. Clarke has remained largely unapologetic. In a 2015 interview with Vice commemorating the film's 20th anniversary, he defended his methods. "I was showing the truth. Kids were having sex. Kids were doing drugs. I didn't invent this reality. I documented it." Notably absent from his defense was any acknowledgement of the difference between documenting existing behavior and directing young people to perform it. Legal action eventually did occur, though the details remain sealed. Court records indicate a settlement was reached in 1998 between an unnamed performer and the production company. The terms included a strengthened non-disclosure agreement and what was described only as compensation for emotional distress. But, and this speaks to the complicated legacy of the film, many of the same performers who have hinted at troubling experiences also express pride in the final product. As one anonymous cast member told the New York Times in 2015, "It was a painful process in many ways, but the film itself matters. It showed things that needed to be seen." In the flickering light of hindsight, Kids exists in a liminal space, a work of undeniable artistic significance created through methods that we now recognize as deeply problematic. The forbidden scene represents this contradiction in its purest form. Powerful cinema born from a process that left real wounds. It looked like fearless truth-telling about American youth. It cost some young performers their sense of safety and agency. It became both a landmark of independent cinema and a turning point in how we think about the ethics of representation. There is a peculiar alchemy in great art that allows it to transcend the circumstances of its creation, to speak truths that its creators may not have fully intended or understood. Kids captured something authentic about youth alienation, about the particular nihilism of the 1990s, about the gap between teenage reality and adult perception. That it did so through methods we now question doesn't negate its insights. It complicates them, asks us to hold contradictory truths simultaneously. If this kind of nuanced exploration of cinema history matters to you, if you believe we can simultaneously appreciate artistic achievement and reckon honestly with its human cost, consider subscribing to our channel. In an era of hot takes and moral certainty, we're committed to exploring the messy, complicated truths behind the films that shaped us, holding space for both their brilliance and their flaws, just as we must do with the humans who created them.